The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, just as I was raking the last of the maple leaves off the back deck. My son-in-law's name was Philip. I'd never quite warmed to him, even from the beginning. He had that particular kind of confidence that comes not from accomplishment, but from never having been told no often enough. He worked in real estate development in Mississauga, drove a leased BMW he couldn't really afford, and had a habit of glancing at his phone whenever I started talking. My daughter? Sandra? No. My daughter. I won't use her name. It still hurts too much. She'd met him at a charity gala 6 years ago and called me 2 days later to say she was in love. I smiled and told her I was happy for her. I was not lying exactly. I was hoping. My wife had passed 3 years before all of this. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. After 34 years of marriage, I was alone in the house in Oakville we'd bought when the kids were small, watching the seasons change out the kitchen window. My daughter called every Sunday. My son called every other Sunday and felt guilty about it. I told them both not to worry. I was fine. I kept busy. I had my pension from 30 years with the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, my vegetable garden, my woodworking, my neighbor Kevin who came over for hockey on Wednesday nights. I was fine. That October morning, my daughter's number lit up my phone at 9:15, which was unusual. Sunday was our time. "Dad," she said, and her voice had that particular tightness I recognized from when she was 16 and had broken something and was trying to decide whether to tell me. "Philip and I have been talking. We want you to come for Thanksgiving. We're hosting this year." I said that sounded lovely. We also want to talk to you about the house. I watched a squirrel run along the top of the fence. "What about the house?" "Just some ideas." "Philip has some ideas. About your situation." "My situation. 63 years old, mortgage-free, healthy enough, not dead. Quite the situation." "Tell Philip I look forward to hearing his ideas," I said pleasantly. I put the phone down and stood in my kitchen for a long moment. Then I called my old partner from my last posting, a man named Doug Ferris, who now worked as a private investigator out of Hamilton. We'd been friends for 22 years. I told him I might need a favor in the coming weeks. He said, "Name it." I want to go back a little because context matters. 8 months before that phone call, my daughter and her husband had come to me with an investment opportunity. A condo development in Brampton. Philip's firm involved in the financing. Projected returns of 12% annually. Very exclusive, very limited. They sat in my living room on the good sofa, the one my wife had picked out, and Philip spread printed documents across my coffee table like a man who had practiced the motion in a mirror. I told them I'd think about it. I did think about it. I also made some calls. The development existed, but Philip's role in it was smaller than he'd implied. And the financing structure had the kind of complexity that tends to benefit the people selling it far more than the people buying it. I'd spent enough years interviewing people to know when a story had been rehearsed. I declined politely and said my financial advisor had concerns. I didn't have a financial advisor. But the lie gave everyone a graceful exit. What I didn't tell my daughter was that I'd also, in the weeks after, begun to pay closer attention. Little things. Philip asking, with elaborate casualness, whether I'd updated my will since my wife passed. My daughter mentioning, once, that the house in Oakville must be a lot to manage alone. A comment at a birthday dinner about seniors' communities. "Very nice ones now, Dad. Nothing like the old days," that nobody quite acknowledged having made. I am not a suspicious man by nature. 30 years in law enforcement can make you see patterns where there are none, and I have always tried to guard against that. But I am also not a fool. I started keeping notes. Thanksgiving fell on the second Monday of October, which meant I drove up to their house in Etobicoke on the Sunday afternoon. It was a large house, newer construction, the kind of place where everything is granite and engineered hardwood, and the furniture looks like it was chosen by someone who'd been told what a home should look like, rather than having lived in one. I brought a bottle of Niagara Peninsula Riesling and a pie from the bakery in downtown Oakville that my wife had loved. My daughter hugged me at the door. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Her husband came out of the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel, smiled his practiced smile, shook my hand. "Vic," he said. That was his name for me. Not Victor, not Mr. Chandler. "Vic, great you could make it. My name is Victor Chandler." I did not tell him to call me Vic. He simply decided one day that he would, and my daughter had given me a look at the time that asked me to let it go, and I had let it go. There were other guests. Philip's mother, a thin woman from Brampton who laughed too loudly and watched me with an assessment in her eyes that she didn't bother to hide. A couple from their neighborhood. I've forgotten their names, which is probably fair, because they were there primarily to provide an audience. A younger woman I didn't recognize who turned out to be Philip's cousin, visiting from Calgary. Dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. The food was good. My daughter can cook. She learned from her mother. I sat at the far end of the table and listened more than I talked, which is a habit I developed over many years and have never seen a reason to break. It was after dessert, when the other guests had moved to the living room, that Philip leaned back in his chair and said, with the satisfaction of a man who has been waiting all evening for his moment, "So, Vic, we should talk about the elephant in the room." I folded my napkin. I wasn't aware there was one. "The house," my daughter said. She was looking at the tablecloth. "Dad, the house is too big for one person. You've said so yourself." "I have never said so. I said it was quiet sometimes. That is not the same thing." "I've been looking at some numbers," Philip said, and he produced his phone, which already had a spreadsheet open on it. A man who comes to Thanksgiving dinner with a spreadsheet loaded on his phone has not arrived at the table spontaneously. The Oakville market right now is extraordinary. Your place, conservative estimate, is worth somewhere in the 1.4, 1.5 range. "I know what it's worth," I said. "Right, of course. So here's what we're thinking." He glanced at my daughter, who was still studying the tablecloth. "You sell. You take the equity. We help you find a nice place. There's a retirement community in Burlington, very active. A lot of people your age. I'm 63. Young, 63. Absolutely. But the point is you'd have liquidity. And we've been talking about expanding the business. And there's an opportunity right now that requires capital. And we thought." He paused, recalibrated, tried a different tone. "We thought maybe this could work for everyone." There it was. I had suspected something along these lines, but hearing it plainly still landed differently than I'd expected. Not anger, exactly. Something more like a long exhale after holding your breath. I looked at my daughter. She finally looked up, and in her eyes I saw something that broke my heart more cleanly than anything Philip had said. She knew. She knew what this was, and she was here anyway, sitting at this table, letting this happen. "That's a generous thought," I said. "Let me think about it." Philip's smile widened. "Of course, no rush. I can send you the prospectus. No need yet. Let me think." That night I slept in their guest room and lay awake listening to the furnace click and the neighborhood settle. In the morning I ate the breakfast my daughter made. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, the same breakfast she'd made me every Father's Day since she was 12. And I drove home to Oakville. I called Doug Ferris from the driveway before I went inside. "Tell me what you can find on Philip Marsh," I said. "Business filings, anything registered with FSRA, civil judgments, the works." "How deep?" "Deep enough." What Doug found over the following 6 weeks was not dramatic. There was no single smoking gun. What there was instead was a pattern. Two previous investment ventures that had dissolved with investors receiving cents on the dollar. A numbered company registered in Alberta whose purpose was vague. A line of credit against their Etobicoke house that was larger than it should have been given Philip's stated income. A complaint filed with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario 18 months prior that had been settled quietly. And one other thing. Doug found a real estate lawyer in Mississauga who had prepared, 4 months earlier, documents related to a potential power of attorney arrangement, prepared at the request of a client whose description matched Philip closely enough. The lawyer wouldn't confirm details, obviously, but Doug had sources. My son-in-law had been planning this for at least 4 months before the Thanksgiving dinner. I sat with all of this for a week. I didn't sleep particularly well. I thought about my daughter, who was 8 years old when she insisted on helping me plant tomatoes, and then cried because she'd put them in the wrong spot and couldn't move them. I thought about my wife, who would have known what to do faster than I did. I thought about what I was willing to do and what I was willing to let happen. Then I made a plan. I called my own lawyer first. A woman in Burlington named Christine, who had handled my wife's estate and who did not waste words. I told her I needed to update certain documents and that I needed a particular arrangement in place before December. She listened without interrupting and said she'd have drafts to me within a week. I called Doug back. I told him I needed one more thing. I called Philip on a Thursday evening and told him I'd been thinking about his proposal. I said it made a lot of sense. I said I had some concerns I'd want to work through, and I wondered if he could recommend someone who could walk me through the investment structure. He recommended, as I had expected he would, a financial advisor connected to his firm, a man named Ashworth, based in Oakville, as it happened. Very convenient. I made an appointment with Ashworth for the following week. I also, before that appointment, made a call to a contact I still had at the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. A woman who had been a constable when I was a sergeant, and who now did work I was not entirely clear on, but which seemed to involve exactly the kinds of arrangements I was describing. I told her what I had. She told me what she needed. We agreed on a timeline. The meeting with Ashworth was instructive. He was polished and rehearsed, as these people tend to be, and the investment vehicle he described was structured in a way that would have been very difficult for a layperson to evaluate. Money would move through two numbered companies before reaching the development fund. Returns were projected, not guaranteed. The risk disclosures were there technically, in a font size that assumed optimism. I asked careful questions and let him believe I was cautious but persuadable. I recorded the meeting on my phone, which is legal in Ontario when one party to the conversation is the person recording. I sent the recording to my RCMP contact that evening. 3 weeks later, I called my daughter and asked if I could come for Sunday dinner. She said of course, she'd make roast chicken. I arrived to find Philip in an unusual mood, brittle in the way of someone who has recently learned something unsettling, but hasn't figured out what it means yet. I would learn later that he had been contacted by a regulator requesting documentation related to several transactions. He didn't know yet where that had originated. We sat down to dinner. My daughter had made roast chicken with roasted root vegetables, exactly as she'd promised. We talked about small things, her work, the neighbors, the first snow that had come and gone. Philip was quiet, which was unlike him. After dinner, while my daughter was making tea, I said to Philip conversationally, "I spoke to my lawyer last week about the house." He looked up from his phone. "I've decided not to sell," I said. "I've also set up a family trust, so the asset situation is a bit more settled now. Christine was very helpful." He was very still. "I've also," I continued, at the same measured pace, "sent some materials to an old colleague of mine for review. You know how it is, you spend 30 years in law enforcement, you keep certain habits." My daughter came back with the tea. She set the cups down and looked between us. Something in the quality of the silence told her what silences between men usually mean when neither of us is talking. "Dad," she said, "what's happening?" "Nothing that needs to happen tonight," I said. I looked at her, really looked at her the way I had when she was small, and had done something she knew was wrong, and was waiting to find out what came next. "But I think your husband and I should have a proper conversation soon. About a number of things." Philip left the room. I heard him on the phone in the hallway, voice low. My daughter sat across from me and wrapped her hands around her mug. Her eyes were wet. "I didn't know how far it had gone," she said. "At the beginning I just thought he said it would help you. I thought it would help you." "I know," I said, and I did know. I had known her for 35 years, and I knew the difference between her lies and her mistakes. This had been a mistake that became something she couldn't find her way back from. That's not the same thing as choosing it. "Is he going to be in trouble?" she asked. I thought about the recording, about the FSRA complaint and the numbered Alberta company and the documents Doug had found, about the people who had lost money in ventures before mine, about the power of attorney documents prepared 4 months before I'd been asked to any dinner. "That depends on him," I said, "not on me." The investigation took the better part of a year to resolve. Philip was not charged criminally. The evidence was sufficient to end his registration with FSRA and refer the matter to civil proceedings brought by previous investors, but the bar for criminal fraud is high, and the Crown has limited resources for cases of this size. He lost his registration. He lost the numbered company. He lost the line of credit when the bank reviewed his file in light of the regulatory action. He and my daughter separated 8 months after that Sunday dinner. She called me when it happened, not crying exactly, but in that flat, exhausted way that is sometimes worse than crying. I drove up to Etobicoke and helped her pack boxes. We worked in mostly silence, the way we had when her mother died. And when we were done, I took her to the Lebanese place on Dundas she'd loved since university, and we sat there until the restaurant closed. She moved back to Oakville for a while. Not with me. She got a place on the other side of town, which was the right call. We both knew it. But she came for dinner on Sundays. She learned slowly that I had not done what I did out of anger, or to win something, or because I had never liked him, though I never had. I did it because I had spent 30 years watching what happens when people let things go unreported, let patterns continue, extended the benefit of the doubt, past the point where the doubt has any benefit left. I had seen what happened to people who trusted too much and said nothing. I had also done it because she was my daughter, and whatever she had or hadn't done, that fact had not changed. The maple leaves came back the following October, same as always. I raked the back deck, and Kevin came over on Wednesday for the game, and Christine called to let me know the trust documents were all in final order. The house in Oakville stayed exactly where it was. It was quieter than it used to be, the year my wife was still alive, but it was mine, and it was right where I wanted it. Some things you do not give away, not to a spreadsheet, not to a practiced smile, not to a man who calls you Vic like he's been doing it all his life. You hold on, you watch. You wait until you know exactly what you're dealing with, and then you act.